The Blocktalk Podcast started because of my passion for the property management industry. I wanted to start a conversation and add some value within the industry with a diverse range of people and professionals who can add something extra. As we start out, my aim is that the podcast offers some useful insight into a variety of views, opinions, thoughts, and foresights from our guests, who include business leaders and industry experts. If you enjoy the podcast and want to find out any other information, head on over to brianwelsh.co.uk. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Blocktalk Podcast with me, Brian Welsh, and Jax Bruce. Jax, how are you this fine day?
I'm good. I'm getting geared up to go to the gym tonight. It's my Thursday night, 2 hours and 15 minutes. The guys at the gym have extended the Olympic lifting session by 15 minutes so we can do some gymnastics in inverted commas.
Wow.
Work, so yeah, gearing up for that. How are you?
Well, I will certainly not be in the gym for 2.25 hours this evening, although I have a Peloton at home. I might go on that tonight. But no, I'm really good, thank you. So today we have the pleasure of talking to Nic Mayall, who is the current president of the Property Managers Association Scotland. Nic has served as president of PMAS since March 2021. He has been in the property management industry since 2006 when he joined Ross Liddell. He joined James Gibb as Ops Director in 2012 and is now Executive Director, Operational Delivery. Nic, thanks very much for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Yeah, much appreciated.
You're very welcome. I didn't realize how long I'd known you for, but I know it's got to be about 10, 15 years, isn't it, since we first met, I guess.
I think it probably is. Yeah, it's probably longer. It's just amazing how quickly the time flies. It's even when you said I started in 2006, it seems like yesterday.
I bet it does. Yeah, I know. Time flies. That does fly. It gets worse as you get older, I can assure you. So
yeah, well, you don't have to assure me. I know that for a fact.
Okay, so let's talk about your role as president of PMAS. How are you getting on in that position, and what are you enjoying about it?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I mean, I've been part of PMAS for a while. I mean, you kind of sort of serve your time before you sort of step up to president. So I've been in PMAS. So I really enjoyed being part of PMAS. You know, I've worked for companies before who perhaps weren't wholly engaged with PMAS, but you know, I think the benefits of being part of the industry body are massive, and I think the industry itself has gone through quite a period of change, and actually being part of that industry body I think is really important, but it's also really beneficial to the members. So it's been a funny time. I mean obviously we've had COVID, so that's impacted, not least because you know all of our meetings have been mainly online, which is fine. But obviously we've not been able to have things like our conference. We had a dinner this year, but we didn't have it last year, and so on. So it's been a little bit disjointed. So I'm really looking forward to this current year, which is going to be my last year as president, and then I'm handing over to Neil Bissett, who's the current vice. But yeah, it's been really good. I'm fortunate enough to have some really good guys and girls on council, many of which have been on for far longer than I. You know, the Ian Friels, the Derek McDonalds, Jacqueline from James Gibb, and David Rees, of course, the past president. So loads of experience, and I kind of reap the benefit of that. So yeah, it's been interesting, but I'm really enjoying it. And really good to see, as I say, things like the dinner, you know, which we had a couple of weeks ago. That was a really good success, and just nice to get people back in a room and enjoying themselves again. So yeah, it's all been good.
Yeah, no, it was a good dinner, wasn't it? It was. I had a taxi booked at 1, which probably saved me from. Although, to be fair, it was quite a quiet night this year, I think, to be honest. But I'm going by past years anyway. Okay, so you're in post until March next year, correct? And President.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So, is there anything you want to kind of achieve in your tenure? Is there anything you've kind of set out to do and you want to achieve during the time?
Yeah. I mean, there's been an awful lot that has been achieved, and you know, I mentioned COVID, but that's not got in the way of a lot of progress. You know, in the last couple of years, there's been some significant things. For instance, there was a big PMAS involvement in the production of the new IRPM Scottish factoring qualification, which is now this much better bespoke fit for purpose qualification. And that took a massive amount of effort. And I have to say, you know, huge plaudits to IRPM for their willingness to engage with PMAS. So it was very much a sort of collaborative effort. But that was really good to see because it involved an awful lot of the PMAS members coming together to actually work with IRPM to get this factoring qualification. And that was launched last year. And we're now seeing people who, in fact, the first cohort have completed the qualifications and all passed, which is great. There's been good numbers in terms of sign up and all the rest of it. And that was missing because the previous IRPM qualification just didn't really hit the mark. But now we have something which is as I say, absolutely fit for purpose. So that's significant. So I'm really delighted to see that gaining traction, which is fab. The other thing which I think is really good, going back to the dinner, but was our awards, because we've talked about these awards for almost as long as I can remember, and it's kind of the thing we've sort of kicked around but not done much about. So actually, you know, back in January when we had one of the meetings, we were in two minds because obviously January, you know, we've been locked down, not locked down. And then January was kind of a mini lockdown. So we were on the verge of actually just saying, this is not going to work. But we decided, perhaps against better advice, that we would just go and run with it. And I'm really pleased that we did, because actually the excitement that generated in the industry, the feedback we got was really outstanding. So that's here to stay. I think that the awards has been a real success story. So I think it's got people really excited and engaged within the industry. And I think perhaps those people who weren't part of it this year are probably thinking, yeah, this is something that obviously has worked. So I think that's a significant step forward. So that's been really, really good. And I can't sort of personally sort of claim the credit, because that's down to our education and training committee within PMAS. They've done all the sort of heavy lifting in terms of that. So that's been good. You know, we've done a lot of stuff in terms of just housekeeping. You know, we've had to redraft our articles of association, which sounds simple, but it's taken a lot of effort to try and update those and make them again something that's relevant for now, because these were done years and years ago. So that's all been done. And a lot of what we're doing is actually what I think an industry body should do. It should be engaging with government and other stakeholders in a whole range of issues. You know, we've got cladding on the go. We've got obviously the tenement maintenance working group as well. So there's a lot of stuff happening in the whole sort of property forum that we are part of. And that's kind of what we should be doing. You know, we should be, you know, front and center in terms of these conversations. And some of the stuff that we're quite keen to do is really up the ante in terms of how we interact and engage, particularly with people in government, you know, MPs, MSPs, councillors even, who perhaps some have got perhaps a little bit of a view of factors which is perhaps a bit old school. You know, we're trying to do a bit of a number on them in terms of education. You know, we're still occasionally get these sort of left field comments, you know, in the press or in Parliament, which are criticising factors for this, that, and the next thing. We're a pretty easy target in some cases. So, you know, we are keen to engage with all these guys, and we've got a bit of a campaign to try and sort of certainly look to assist them and be more interactive with them. So yeah, there's been a lot of stuff which I think, you know, has happened, and there's a lot of stuff which is happening. So yeah, it's been fun and games.
No, it sounds like you've been very busy actually. Coming back to the awards actually, and as you know, CPL as kind of lead sponsor of your dinner, allowed us to kind of have someone sitting on the judging panel, and I decided that I would do it, much to the worry of I think the people in CPL. Never mind. And actually, the thing that struck me was the amount of effort that had gone into actually, drafting the nominations, and the amount of nominations that came through as well was pretty impressive for the first round. And actually, at the dinner, the kind of amount of people who came up and because they obviously knew I was on the judging panel and came up to me and spoke to me about the awards and all of these sort of things, there was a real buzz about them.
I think there absolutely was, and you could see that in the reaction of people who won on the night. So, I mean, I've been at some awards, I'm sure you have too, where the winner is announced and they just sort of trot up on stage, take the award, handshake, and away they go again. But there was a real sense of excitement, and even the people who were nominated but didn't necessarily win, were just really pleased to be nominated and put forward, and even those that didn't make the shortlist. I think it was just nice, and I think that's what you get if you've not had industry awards. And I always thought it was odd that the factoring industry was probably one of the few, certainly property industries, that didn't have awards. I mean, there's a whole raft of awards for developers or house builders or whatever, in terms of awards, but we've really been behind the curve here. So I think it was great, and thanks for doing a great job in the judging along with the others. But yeah, I think given the time people had, because as I say, that back in January we weren't sure about these things, and probably next year we'll start planning this probably 2 or 3 months in advance to give people more time. So actually the time to do the nominations, the time to do the judging was all condensed into a fairly short time frame, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. So from that point of view, I think it's been really great.
Yeah, no, and at the end of the day, you learn as well from the first year you do it. So you tweak it in the coming years and things like that to make it better. Yeah. So no, it was a phenomenal response for the kind of first year. Just actually to touch on something that you kind of mentioned when you were talking there, when we chatted to Annie Flint a few weeks back, she suggested the industry ought to change from property factors to property manager or to property management as a word, because factor has a kind of negative connotation dating back to the old role of factor and landlord and these sort of things. Have you got any views on that? Would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, what a really good question. Actually, I do have view. I've had views for this for ages, actually, and my view is a personal one. So this is not representative necessarily of PMAS of the industry. This is a personal point of view, because obviously PMAS is the Property Managers Association, as opposed to the Property Factors Association. I actually disagree with Annie. All respect to Annie. In some cases, I find the phrase property management or property managers actually is a really wide generic term. It can mean letting agents, it can mean a whole raft of things, and I get the sort of historical negative connotations of the factor, going around on horseback, in gathering rents from people who don't want to pay or can't pay and all the rest of it. And that's historical, and it's quite difficult to get away. The advantage of the word factor, and this is probably the reason why it's still used. People, tend to, in the industry still refer themselves as property factor. And if you look at people's websites or literature or written statement of services, it will tend to refer to property factors, and the Property Factors Act is the Property Factors Act. It's because people understand what a property factor is. It kind of does what it says in the tin. It's something that people recognize, and I get the negative connotation, but equally it's quite a convenient default, because it saves you having to explain what you do. Most people will kind of have some understanding about what a property factor is, but they might not necessarily twig if you just use a generic term like a property manager.
Yeah, you do have a point, actually, because I remember pre the property factors register, which was a great thing from my point of view, because it was a marketing list when it was created. You would if you were doing your kind of research on your market, which any person who's in business in a specific market should do. I would just Google property management companies, and you get a lot of letting agents and these sort of things. I guess because we've always struggled with this one, serving both the English market and the Scottish market. Because of course England refers to it as block management, which I guess is very specific as well, and not just property management. But I mean, my other half is a property manager, but she's a commercial property manager. She doesn't touch residential,
Yeah.
So. And commercial management, residential management are entirely different. So I do get what you mean.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And actually, there's nothing wrong with the English version, block manager. We don't use it here, but again, it is a distinct difference from a letting agent or any other type of property manager. So I'm not against dropping factor, but it would have to be to be replaced with something better that still said
what it says on the tin.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, thanks for that. Something that's come up over and over again is the need for, within the podcast when we've been kind of interviewing people, is the need for educating homeowners on what the role of a property manager or property factor is. First-time buyers and downsizers in particular needed more information because they were the kind of groups of demographic, I guess that our demographic that didn't really, maybe hadn't come up against a factor before. And Annie actually suggested that Home Report needs to do more as well. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think and Annie's comments in the Home Report certainly have some sort of merit. The Home Report, by the nature of what it is, will tend to focus primarily on the condition of that individual property, whereas it won't focus perhaps so much on the sort of wider common areas and so on. Although anyone who's buying a house, and it'll be no different countrywide. That their solicitor will ask the factor, some basic questions. Is there a sinking fund? Are there works planned in the future, and so on? But I do agree. I think certainly for people who have not been exposed to having a factor before, it's really important that they get the information which is understandable right at the start, so that there are no two minds as to what a factor is, what the obligations they've got in terms of payment and maintenance and so on. But I think factors certainly have improved and upped their game in terms of that. A lot of the literature that goes out, and part of this has been driven by things like the Property Factors Act, because obviously all factors must have a written statement of services which sets out effectively a service level agreement saying that exactly this is what your factor will do, and this is exactly what they're going to charge for the service. So that information is certainly a whole lot better than it was before the Property Factors Act, and a lot of factors will now use client portals, which you'll be familiar with. They'll use good information on website. They'll use customer guides and so on. So I think that whilst there's always a need to make sure that people are properly educated, and that is absolutely the role of the factor, I think by and large we're much better at doing that than we were before. I think the information is much wider, it's much clearer, it's much better. So always room for improvement, but I think we're in a better place than we were 10 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. Understood. So when you think about the kind of next 10, 15 years of property management, what do you see, except retiral, obviously?
I was going to say I see myself on a beach in Spain. and that's as far as I look. It's very difficult because we're there's a lot of stuff that could happen, and whether it does happen will be interesting. And that's obviously going to, come into play over the next few years. There's been talk. I mean, for instance, I mentioned IRPM qualifications. There's always been talk whether or not at some point there will be mandatory qualifications for factors. Letting, to some extent, has kind of jumped the gun on factoring. I can see it happening at some point, but probably not for a number of years. Having said that, I think doing the homework in terms of producing an exam which would be fit for purpose, should that be the case, is absolutely the right thing to do. So that's probably some way down the tracks. I think probably one of the key points is what happens with the tenement maintenance working group, because you probably know that there's a number of recommendations that have come out of that group, which has now gone to the Law Commission. We're going to be involved in those discussions, but they're not going to certainly resolve anything for a number of years, probably, and probably it would take changes in legislation. Obviously, they're talking about things like property inspections. They're talking about sinking funds. They're talking about residents associations being compulsory. So, I mean, these are all in isolation and together, very, very good suggestions. It's whether or not they're actually going to work, because I do think that governments, I suppose for natural reasons, have been a little bit reticent about changing legislation to facilitate these things. I mean, fire safety is a very good example. A lot of the fire safety stuff, they could have gone down the route of legislation. They've kind of gone down the route of guidance. So it remains to be seen what comes to pass with some of these things, and that's on the sort of legislation side. And on a practical side, and probably in the shorter term, undoubtedly in our industry, there's been a bit of a COVID effect. People working from home has had the effect that for all factors, I think the levels of correspondence has gone through the roof, and that's an understandable byproduct of COVID. I think as we come out of COVID, that will probably find its balance and find its rhythm, and I think if that kind of drops off, that will be to the benefit of all of us. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff kind of in the pipeline and so on. And obviously last year we saw the revised code of conduct, which I'm not anticipating there's going to be any sort of major sort of issues that come from that. But yeah, there's interesting stuff ahead. And of course the cladding crisis or the cladding issues are still some way off from finding a suitable resolution. We've got the single building assessment pilot scheme, which is going on just now, but that's quite difficult to see the sort of finite timescale on when that's going to resolve. So there's an awful lot of stuff happening within the industry, or it has the potential to affect the industry. But I think some of these things are probably, when you're talking about what's going to happen in 10 or 15 years, some of them might be quite close to that sort of 10-year period. Yeah,
okay. Yeah, things do take a long time to get through these sort of organisations, don't they? Yeah. So, okay. Right, so Jax, over to you with your 3 quirky questions.
Thanks. I was going to say, you guys should put a date in the diary for 10 years from today, and Nick will be lying on a beach in Spain, and you can have a chat about what's going on.
I'll be lying on a beach somewhere else.
That's right. You can buy me a pina colada.
So Nick, I ask 3 quirky questions to all of our guests at the end. So the first one is, what's your biggest failure across your entire career, and what did you learn from it?
We'll start with an easy one, Jax. Why don't you? Yeah, yeah. That's quite tough. Yeah, it's quite hard not to be sort of very trite with these things. Yeah, I would like to say I've had no failures, but that would be a absolutely blatant lie. I've not had any catastrophic failures, which I suppose is good. And some of the failures I've had have been kind of short term, and I've kind of learned the lessons. And I suppose the first one was actually I started off my career. I've always been in property. Before factoring, I worked in the estate agency for my sins. And then I've worked in company relocation, but my first job was in the estate agency in a very small company which had offices in Crieff and Perth, and I was quite settled. I wasn't particularly ambitious in those early years, and I got made redundant because the property market absolutely nosedived, and we were all out of jobs. And at the time, I remember thinking this is the worst thing in the world. But it forced me then to look at Edinburgh and Glasgow for jobs. I ended up moving into a career in relocation in Edinburgh. So actually what was to me a hideous failure at that point actually ended up being almost the best thing that happened, because it forced me to broaden my horizons, move into an industry I hadn't even thought of. And then that kind of transmuted into almost what I'm doing today. There's always been a property theme in the jobs I've had, but it just meant I had to kind of stick my head above the parapet and think, actually, there's more to small town life and move to the big city. So that was one failure. And my I don't know if I could tell this story actually. You can mute it or delete it.
Jackson and I have just sat up in our chairs and
but actually, one of my it's not necessarily a failure. It's perhaps a lesson learned. But I remember in my early factoring days, and I'd always worked in property, but I just newly moved into factoring. And in those years, I was young and enthusiastic. I still am certainly not young, but I'm enthusiastic still. But very new to the job, and I started off factoring in Dundee. I had a Dundee portfolio, which was a really good learning curve. But in those days, we didn't get that many emails. It tended to be used to get a bundle of letters in your desk, so communication was much slower. But I remember arguing with one client over about £2.50 or something, and nowadays you wouldn't really bother about that so much, but I must have sent about 8 letters to this guy, and he sent letters back and all the rest of it. And eventually I must have worn him down, but he got the last laugh. He sent me a letter back with a check for £2.50 with a 50p sellotape to it, so I could go out and buy myself a tub of Vaseline and shove the letter where the sun don't shine. and I had that letter on my wall for years. I've lost it now, but it was a very good lesson, I think, in not being a bit officious. And I think I learned from that. So it's perhaps not a failure, but perhaps a salutary lesson to me.
And you definitely can't do that with emails, can you? Pictures.
Although to be fair, I'm not sure how much postage was in those days, but I'm sure £2.50 probably took up yours and his, I guess.
Well, exactly. And I think that was probably his point. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Oh dear.
So if you ruled the world for a day, Nick, what would you do?
Oh my goodness! I don't get any easier, do they? Yeah. So you mean aside from having a property factor compulsory, which was obviously been number one on my list? Yeah, I've probably got a few actually. And actually, the first one would be I would ban bus gates in Glasgow. I don't know if you've ever been caught in these things. I've had 4 penalty notices in the space of about 6 months with these bloody bus gates, which seem to appear. I tried to avoid driving in Glasgow, and even more having collected all these penalty points. So I would absolutely ban bus gates. My other bugbear, which I would actually make a criminal offence, is for if you hold the door open and people don't say thank you. That really gets up my hooter, and that would be possibly a hanging offence, I think, in my new world. I suppose if I feel obliged to do something for the good of society, 24 hours is probably not long enough to cure cancer, solve the Ukrainian crisis. I don't know. I'd probably try and redistribute wealth. I think, it seems we live in a society where the rich have a lot and all around the world, and there's a very small number of people who've got an awful lot of the wealth. So a bit of wealth redistribution, how that would work, I have no idea, but that seems like a good concept to me.
Yeah. Here. I'm actually writing my a story about that stuff, how to solve that problem.
Well, if you find the answer, please let me know.
It was supposed to be a short story, and it's turning into something a bit longer. So yeah. So when you're 70 and look back at your life, what will you be glad you did or feel proud of? Either something you've done already or something you still want to do.
Yeah, I don't feel compelled to say I'm very proud of my children, because I am very proud of my children, not just having produced them, but actually they've all turned out to be quite nice humans, which is quite nice. I've got twins who are 24, which really kind of ages me. So Iona's a lawyer, and Angus has graduated last year and he's now working in housing as well. So, and then my youngest is at first year at high school. So I'm pleasantly pleased, but I'm sure everyone with children is would say the same thing. I'm probably kind of proud of my career as well, and my small contribution to the industry. I think giving back or being part of things like industry bodies is a good thing, and if you can make a small difference, then that's great. So I think all my sort of career moves or career path has been a source of pride in one way or the other. I think I've done most things that I've probably wanted to do, which I've traveled quite a lot. I've lived abroad. So, I've ticked most of my boxes. So when I'm on my Spanish beach at the age of 70, I think I can probably hopefully look back with a bit of satisfaction.
Excellent. Thanks, Nick.
That's great, Nick. Actually, thinking about what the answer to your first question there about being made redundant from the estate agency business, it actually reminds me, because my job starting CPL was, I worked for a very large software company and who acquired a lot of other businesses, and I got the operational end of M&A. So effectively, I was the guy who was pitched in to review the business, see how to integrate it into the bigger, the wider group, and also to cut cost. And I remember vividly, actually, one of the businesses that I was pitched into, and I can't remember how many staff we were taking out. Let's just say it was a staff of 100, and we were taking 10 of them out, and the 10 that were being made redundant were looking like it was the worst thing that they had ever happened to them, and the guys who didn't lose their jobs were like, God, the look of relief, but actually, looking back at these guys, it was the 10 that left or were made redundant that flourished, because they were put in a position where they had to go and find something else. So they were, so if this hadn't happened, they'd probably been in the same job for the next period of time. So they actually had to get up and do something about it. And I still know some of these people who who still talk to me, and they all say that they'd never be where they are today, or unlikely to be where they are today if they hadn't actually been made redundant. Which I think is you're dealt your cards. It's how you deal with them that is the thing.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I think there's probably loads of people who are doing jobs and are probably great at their job or whatever, but there's a certain sort of complacency in that. And actually, I think you're right. I think in many cases, which is good, although the minute you are made redundant, you know, it is the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
But it can be a springboard to lots of things, and it just means that you've just got to go out there and as you say, that very often you end up doing something that's probably much better.
Yeah. Anyway, brilliant. Okay, thanks very much, Nic. Thanks for coming on and chatting to us. That's been really interesting. And if anyone wants to ask you any questions, you know, as your position in PMAS or in James Gibb, how would they get in touch with you?
They can send a letter with a 50p sellotape. So no, they can email me at my James Gibb address. So yeah, delighted if anyone wants to get in touch. Not a problem at all.
Thanks very much, Nic.